Hey, so the first book that I'm going to talk about is one of my favorites. It's by Octavia E. Butler. It's called Parable of the Sower. It's actually part of a two-book series. There had been a third book planned called Parable of the Trickster. Unfortunately, Octavia Butler passed away before even starting it. So unfortunately, that leaves us with two books. And what's great about these books, Parable of the Sower and then also Parable of the Talents, is they don't end on a cliffhanger. It's not like you're going to be missing anything from Parable of the Trickster. She wrote each book without any intention of a sequel, and then she wrote the sequel without any intention of a third book, and then she started thinking about and talking about the third book later. So they're connected, but they're not reliant on each other. Like, you're not going to feel like, oh man, I need to know what happened in the third book. So Parable of the Sower. This is one of my favorite books. Its plot is pretty straightforward. It's about a girl named Lauren Olamina who is in a gated community in the post-apocalyptic future in a fantasy town just outside of Los Angeles. And the community is led by her father, a minister, who is trying to keep the community together because he thinks that in the future
America will become great again.
A phrase that one of the characters, he's a super conservative guy, and he uses that phrase, "Make America Great Again," which is just really spooky given today's current political climate. So there's a lot of violence and a lot of gore outside of the community. There's some infighting inside the community, and then Lauren's younger brother sneaks out. Around the same time that he sneaks out, people start breaking in and stealing and shooting weapons into the community because the people on the outside resent the security that the people on the inside have, which is a really interesting look at social class, and poverty, and the way that wealth is perceived. So these people have next to nothing, but the people on the outside have literally nothing, and so that creates this dialogue of what is poverty, and that's really interesting to me. The book also looks at feminism. So in the book, the wall eventually comes down, and Lauren has to make her way from roughly the Pasadena area all the way up out of the state, out of California, to where there's some water, where there's some food, and start her own community. While she's on her journey, she is cataloging thoughts that she has about religion. A lot of these thoughts are her own views about what God is, and they are not thoughts that her minister father would appreciate. She doesn't believe in the Judeo-Christian God. She has sort of discovered that she believes that change is a persistent energy that created all life on Earth, created all destruction, creates everything. And so she starts calling that God. And so it's not a sentient God. It's not an old man in the sky God. It's not even the God of most mythologies. It's just sort of things will change. So it kind of resonates with Buddhism a little bit, but without the mythological figures. And it kind of resonates with thermonuclear dynamics, but it's a little more spiritual than just the science of it. A lot of the quotes are very brief and poetic, but not really poetry. So one that she has, I just opened to a random chapter. She calls her people Earth Seed. So her primary belief is that because change is inevitable, eventually the Earth will be no longer habitable. And because she's in a post-apocalyptic world relatively soon, right? Like, we should be thinking about this. And so she thinks that humans need to start investing in space travel for humans. She calls us Earth Seed because she wants us to plant new life on new planets. Earth Seed, cast on new ground, must first perceive that it knows nothing. That's one of her quotes. So what she's saying there specifically is that once we do get to new ground, once we do find a new planet to live on, that we have to recognize that we don't know anything. Like, everything we know is based on Earth. So all of the environmental stuff that we know, all of the evolution stuff that we know, it's all based on being connected to the Earth. And so once we start populating new planets, all of that's going to change. And so she's writing these in a sort of religious text that couples with the narrative. So you can see the narrative. It's written like a regular book, but then at the beginning of the chapters, and sometimes within the chapters, there's these little blurbs. It's hard to talk about books for me without giving spoilers, so I'm sorry if you think this is too much information about the book. But basically, Lauren's quest is to get out of California once the walls come down, and I think that's not really a spoiler. Like, I think going into the story, you can tell that that's coming. The second book takes place a little bit later in life, and it jumps around between Lauren and some other characters' perspectives, but this one is primarily Lauren's. And you meet a group of people who eventually become sort of followers of her Earthseed religion. What I love about the book is that it talks about race. As you can see, Octavia Butler wrote the book about a black woman. And in science fiction, in the time that this was published, and especially in her earlier works, that wasn't really a thing that the publishing world recognized, was that African Americans like science fiction. Like, who knew? In fact, her book Kindred, which is also a fantastic book that deals with time travel and a woman going back in time to the slave days of the antebellum South, that was one of the first books published by one of the first science fiction books published by an African American woman in the United States, if not the first. But as far as I know, it's one of the first. So she's really groundbreaking. Her work is very different, very provocative. It's not a fun read. Like, if you just like books that make you feel good, this is not the book to do it. It's very bleak. It's very dark. And there's a lot of violence, some really like messed up morals. But it's really provocative and it's really engaging. It is very liberal. So if you are a social conservative and you're an economic conservative and you don't like the idea that our culture should change and shift and grow, this book might not be for you. But I encourage you to try it anyway. It might change your perspective a little bit. A lot of the negative reviews that I've read of it are about people who disagree with her religious views. And it should be noted that Octavia Butler actually doesn't believe the same things that Lauren Olamina believes. Octavia Butler, she had said in the past that she wrote a book about a religion that she would have believed at 18. She was in her 50s when she passed away, I believe. So, those are very different mindsets. So I wouldn't take this book as being gospel, It would be more just a thought process and her asking questions of herself. So I just wanted to recommend this book to people.